Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Cyversity Engage. Today's panel is going to be focused on the BISO career path. And we're here today to talk to you about our experiences in BISO and hopefully give you some tips and tricks if this is something that you're looking forward to in your future career path. We're going to go ahead and get started in a couple minutes just to give everybody a chance to join us. And then we'll kick off the panel shortly after. Looks like our numbers are still going up. All right, looks like we're steadying out a little bit, so give it just a minute longer here, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Okay, it's 3 after. We're going to go ahead and get started. And what we're going to do today is today's panel is going to be focused on being a BISO. And ultimately, one of the things that our wonderful panelists here are going to discuss is being a BISO other than at Target. So the last Cyversity Engage series was brought to you about being a BISO at Target. And now we're going to talk to people who get to be a BISO outside of the Target organization and kind of what that looks like for them and how that translates over to BISO in general. So for many of you here, you may either be very familiar with the concept of BISO, or maybe you're all new to this and you're wondering where BISO even came from. So let me give you a little bit of understanding, because when I did the research, I was kind of surprised to find out that the BISO concept, while may have been around for a while, really took hold in 2020 when we actually ran into the pandemic and we all started working from home. It really became apparent to many, many organizations that their CISO's objectives and their security requirements just were difficult to share with the business, and the CISO didn't have time to get to know the business, and the business leaders sure didn't have enough time to understand security's objectives. And because of that, BISO was really become anew and really came into its own around that time frame. So only 2 years, so it's a pretty young idea. And ultimately, the focus has always been on finding people that can be well-versed in both the business culture and understanding of business priorities, at the same time of being extremely knowledgeable about security and their objectives as well, and marrying those two concepts and being an intermediary between those two areas. So today we're actually going to be talking to 2 people who are in varying levels of their career as BISOs. And we're going to talk more about Chad. So Chad here is, Chad Walker is with Albertsons, and he is currently a PISO. So a little bit different, just portfolio information security officer instead of BISO, which is business information security officer, but a lot of overlap in the job itself and the concept itself. and he is currently a director for the retail space as a BISO. And then we also have Elizabeth Miller here today. She's representing from MassMutual. Elizabeth is more of a seasoned BISO. She's been in her role a little over 3 years at MassMutual, and she's got a lot of great experience to call on and share with us today. So who am I? I am Ranae Moore. I'm your moderator for today's conversation. I've actually been in a BISO role for over 5 years of my career at Target. And I've had the privilege of working with various areas of the business. And today I primarily focus on architecture and engineering enablement. I'm also proud to say I am the acting president for the Minnesota chapter of ISSA, Information Systems Security Association. So I get this amazing opportunity, along with Cyversity, to interact with our community and help people who are in security careers either seek what they're looking for or even make changes when necessary and guide. I also get a chance to promote the heck out of BISO programs because I can see the value and I know how important they can be to an organization's success. So I'm going to go ahead and give the same opportunities to our panelists here. So Elizabeth, I'm going to start with you. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ranae, and thank you for having me here. Happy to be here with you all. So my name is Elizabeth Miller, and I'm a Business Information Security Officer at MassMutual. As Ranae mentioned, I've been in the role about 3.5 years now, and I've had the opportunity to support a variety of different areas of the business, including several of our corporate functions, so finance, investment management, brand and marketing, as well as several of our different lines of business. And I currently focus on our distribution channel, so third-party distribution, as well as our career field agents. And I also support our institutional solutions channel and the divestiture of our retirement services business. Prior to joining MassMutual, I was in the medical device and pharmaceutical industries. I started my career in IT as a business systems analyst and project manager. And after several years, migrated over to cybersecurity, where I managed cybersecurity awareness and education programs. And then in 2019, I joined MassMutual as a BISO, where I am now. I currently live in Northern Connecticut with my husband, my son, and a handful of animals. So I think that's it for me. So Chad, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Hey, everybody. My name is Chad Walker. I'm currently a PISO director at Albertsons Companies, which is a really big grocery company. As Ranae said, it's PISO with a P because we're special, but also because the organization aligns towards business portfolios. So it's just a word that works throughout the organization. I've been in retail security in some form or another for over a decade now, including starting as like a security guard at Target Corporate, but then onto information security consulting role there, and then a threat hunter at Best Buy, security operations at Code 42, another stint back at Target where I started having the BISO title officially, and now at Albertsons. There's nothing interesting about my personal life at all, so I'm not going to mention anything.
It's amazing, Chad. Thank you. I'm sure there's interesting stuff, but I get it. So thank you both for joining me today. And just to let everybody know in the audience, we're excited to hear your questions, and we want you to feel like you're a part of the conversation. We're going to ask you, though, to please go ahead and submit those questions to the Q&A section, and we'll definitely go ahead and make time for those at the end of our discussion today. And we're going to kind of break today's discussion down into kind of 3 different sections. So I really like to start foundationally and start talking about like being a BISO, right? Like it's kind of a cool role, right? It's really interesting. It's got a lot of different facets to it. And it's been a really interesting journey for anyone who's in the role. So what are some of the things that attracted you really to becoming a BISO? You've got these great backgrounds and you're landing here in BISO. So Elizabeth, for you, what were some of the things about the BISO role that really attracted you to applying and becoming a BISO?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think I've always been drawn to roles that focus heavily on communication and relationship building, because that is where my skill set lies. But I think in particular, when we look at the BISO role, I think some of the things that really stood out for me is, as I mentioned, in previous roles, I'd had the opportunity to manage cybersecurity awareness and education programs. So through that role, I had the opportunity to talk to a lot of people across the organization, right? This is pre-pandemic, so we were in booths and cafeterias, lunch and learns, et cetera. And I think as I was having conversations with so many people across the org, one consistent theme always kind of surfaced around the fact that, as folks would approach our booth and then realize that we were cybersecurity, they'd take a few steps back and say, oh no, not cybersecurity, right? And you'd always hear about folks, trying to say, oh, I have this project coming up. I'm going to wait to try to talk to cybersecurity until day before go live. And I always just thought, there's got to be a better way here to change the culture, right? To get folks to really see that cybersecurity is not the department of no, and that we really should be seen as a business enabler, right? And then also on the other side, I think it's important that a cybersecurity organization is realistic, right? We're not the department of no, and we're not about avoiding all risk, right? That's not what cybersecurity is about. It's about identifying risk, quantifying that risk, determining how you can mitigate it, and then ultimately working with the business to make the right decision for the business, right? A lot of times we're going to move forward and make decisions that incorporate quite a bit of risk, but that might be the right way to move forward as long as we're open about what the risk is on the table and we've talked through all mitigating factors. That's the key factor, right? So I think working that and thinking about how we can change culture both within a security organization and with the business was something I was very passionate about, and having the opportunity to actually make a change in this space, I think is what ultimately drove me to pursue the BISO role.
Very nice. And Chad, how about you? What were some of those attracting factors for you?
At the time, it would be the fact that it was such a multidisciplinary security role. I think in cybersecurity, we sometimes have tunnel vision on having specialists in everything, right? Somebody with super deep expertise in a specific domain. And really where I was at in my career, because I had done, application requirements, I had done hunting, I had done operations, right? I was starting to see security as the entire enterprise package of all the different capabilities, right? And so PISO or BISO rather was really, it might be the only role where you can really leverage that entire suite of skills. So that's really one of the areas that intrigued me about the BISO role.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. So Elizabeth, from your point of view, I definitely saw it as an opportunity to help affect positive change for the reputation of security. And Chad, for certain, being in my career, I'm late in my career, 20 years in, I feel like overall, I've done so many different roles and I've had so many different experiences. I'm a generalist, but I'm a really good generalist. I can see big picture and things like that. So it's more, I think, when I saw BISO as well as just that bridge that allows you to take all that incredible knowledge you've gained through various positions and be able to apply it in a way that helps build connection and bridging between a business area and a security area, which don't always see eye to eye.
Yeah, on the point about being a generalist too, is that a huge function of the BISO role is being that liaison and ambassador between the business and security. So it's really helpful in some cases if you do have that expertise in how something like security operations sees the world, how application security sees the world, and then you just become that much better of a translator for those two parties.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So
yeah. I was just going to build off of that too, that I think that one of the key facts about being a generalist is that you can look at problems in a way that, you may be brought in to solve a network security problem, and you may realize hey, we actually might be better off if we worked with the identity and access management team here and found a solution in this domain. So having having generalized knowledge across a lot of different domains, I think can help make sure that we're bringing the right parties to the table to ultimately come up with the best solution, which may not have been the original solution, right? So I think that is, one of the best things about having the generalized knowledge.
That's terrific. Thank you, Elizabeth. Yes. So as we kind of look forward, so we got excited about the role, right? We're all like, yeah, we're jazzed to be a BISO. Let's get into the role. Now we're in the role. Have some of those like understanding and expectations kind of shifted as you've done the job? And then what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I think the biggest paradigm shift, like frankly for me, has been, and this might be just the normal InfoSec career trajectory, maturity issue or whatever, but where I'm at now, and especially when I started the BISO role, I realized that enterprises, organizations, and the people that work for different groups they are screaming for security support. Like, forget the entire notion of like people don't take security serious, or that whole like forget about that. People want our help so bad. They literally just want to be told what to do, and told what to do at a good time, as opposed to like, a day after a project goes into production, they want to be told about that 6 months ago, right? So yeah, it's like forget this idea of like security versus the world. Like oh my God, they want our help so bad.
That's amazing. And that's a great point, Chad. So what about you, Elizabeth? What's changed for you?
I think one of the biggest things, and this isn't, surprising or anything, but I think one of the biggest things that I've learned over the years that I would want someone who's kind of jumping fresh into the role to really understand too, is that as a BISO, you don't have to have the answer to everything, right? You're going to be presented with problems from, business areas, again, covering every domain, every day. And oftentimes the business will come to you not really sure what they're asking. Sometimes I'll have a meeting put on my calendar that just says security questions, right? And you have to just, be ready to wear whatever hat you need to wear that day to address the situation. And the role of the BISO is to be able to ask good questions, right? And to be able to peel back the layers to understand what is the risk that we're really dealing with here. And, who do I need to bring in order to help develop the right solution? Obviously, there's times when you're presented with, straightforward risk questions, and you have to have enough knowledge, and you should be empowered to make decisions and empower enable the business to move forward quickly. So that is a key role of the BISO, but also to have the self-awareness and the confidence, frankly, to say, you know what, I'm not the subject matter expert here. I'm not the smartest in the room. Let me leverage my network of subject matter experts within the cybersecurity organization to develop the right solution, right? And I think that having that self-awareness to know, hey, I can help this move on forward quickly, versus, hey, this is a bigger problem that I need some support with, is something that's really key to being a BISO. And it's something that, I struggled with when I first started, is feeling like I had the weight on my shoulders, right? And it isn't like that. You should leverage folks in your organization. That's why the cybersecurity organization exists behind you, right? And make sure that you do have an organizational culture that supports that, right? And that folks do have your back as a BISO. So I think that's helped me put a lot into perspective over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are all great points. And as I kind of look forward, I think about like two complete pillars for BISO are, one, we have to be really good at prioritizing. I mean, we get so much thrown at us. We're going to get involved in every conversation, and we try to be. We have to know how to prioritize. So what are some of the techniques that you employ to be able to prioritize your work and prioritize what goes to leadership? Because we have to make sure we're constantly informing our leadership about what's really needed to be done. So for you, Chad, what are some of the techniques that you use?
I'm going to cheat and talk about like hypothetically how it might work in an organization that is very successful at prioritization. And not to use a buzzword, but like agile ceremonies and processes and tools are a way to do it. If your BISO team can have the discipline to actually, like, for example, just like create JIRA tickets from anything from I'm engaged on this massive $100 million project that's going to last 5 years to I literally just had a 15-minute phone call. And then basically via agile ceremonies, like have a backlog grooming session with your team and say, all right, this is something where I need to be focused for X number of hours. We'll t-shirt size it. Is the risk significant? So on and so forth. And then this other stuff just sort of has to, for lack of a better term, fall through the cracks because we can't do everything and we shouldn't do everything, right? And then that's ideal though, right? That's like, so just like for me personally, it's if I was stuck in the elevator with like the CIO and they were like, what are you up to? Like, I should have that elevator speech ready on the 2 or 3 things I'm focused on. And if find myself really like following a thread where just because I'm really nerding out on a topic, or because I have a very loud business unit that they're pulling me away from those like elevator pitch 3 things, then that's sort of an alarm like, all right, am I prioritized correctly?
Absolutely, yes. That's a really great way to state it. How about you, Elizabeth? For you, how do you help yourself learn? Like we talked about, you can't do it all. So how do you focus priority and how do you maintain that? Because obviously it's changing at all times.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as the threat landscape changes every day, right? The highest risk priority could also change. So that coupled with the fact that there's always way too much work to do. I don't think you'd ever hear a cybersecurity team that says, oh, we have capacity, right? So I think it's tough. Like when I go into new lines of business, I'll talk about how I approach it there. And, when I start to have conversations with the leadership teams, one of the first things I'll always make sure to understand from them is, hey, what are your pain points? What are some of the problems that you're currently experiencing with security? Any, issues that you have going on that maybe have been dragging you down for years and years and years and just haven't been able to get traction on. And through those conversations, I do try to first start by identifying, hey, are there any like quick wins here, right? So when you start a relationship, trying to prove to the business that, hey, we really can add value and be a good partner here to streamline processes. I think that's always very important to start the relationship. And again, to show that, as you tackle some of the bigger, more strategic issues that you need a lot of support from them on, show them right from the start you can add value. So I'd always start there. And then I'd also try to understand if there's new work that's, starting up right now. So for example, if you'd want to know, hey, is there a new project that you're thinking of launching, or a new business process that's coming into play, new compliance regulations, whatever that may be, so that security can get on the ground floor there and help them again show that, hey, if we embed security by design into this new program, we're going to eliminate a lot of the workload down the line, and you're not going to be coming to us day before go live and saying, how do I check the box for security, right? So those are, kind of the 2 things I always do from like a quick prioritization perspective. And I mean, then when you're looking at the rest of the enterprise, how do you prioritize everything else that's going on? First you have to know the business, right? So meeting with all the different leaders in the space to understand what are the key operational procedures in that area. That's always the first thing, because oftentimes we don't know what we don't know, right? So we have to understand what are the key operations, and then, do that standard analysis, leveraging your security intelligence team to understand, what are the external pressures that we're seeing, from an industry perspective, from a company perspective, and then, looking down at the individual sector you support. And then looking at some of the internal control procedures. So through your conversations, understanding, hey, where do we have the biggest control gaps? And of course, you're going to want to look at, okay, where are we seeing internal control procedures? And that's going to be your area of highest risk to start tackling, right? So again, all of this work does take time, and the priorities can switch so quickly, but that's how I approach it from a systematic perspective, especially when you're jumping in for new lines of business.
What's amazing, Elizabeth, what you did is you just transitioned us really perfectly into the next discussion point, which is the BISO program itself. So being a BISO is one thing, but being a part of a program and understanding what goes into building a strong and effective BISO program really comes down to like, how are you approaching all the things you just mentioned, Elizabeth? So all of those things, Chad, from your perspective, when we're looking at like, how do you leverage your resources and how do you train up your teams to be successful BISOs as you're developing a BISO program? What are some of the pillars you want your BISO program to stand for?
This is actually timely, just because my own thinking on this very topic has kind of changed dramatically, probably in the last couple of weeks, honestly. And this is the big question I've been struggling with that is changing my thinking. let's say that I or somebody, well, I'll just use myself for an example. Let's say I'm an individual contributor, a BISO, and I'm absolutely killing it, and my business units love me, and I'm doing everything right, okay? If I walk away, or if I'm replaced, and what follows is somebody that the business doesn't like, who isn't good at their job, who is struggling to add value, then the question for me is, was I even that good, right?
Mhm.
So how I see the world now in PISO land is you can have, yes, especially when the program is small and you're building that credibility out and building those relationships. Yes, have your IT heroes and your rock stars and your nerds, whatever, right? But if you're not driving towards repeatable processes and patterns, if you're not saying, all right, a PISO for this business unit has these monthly cadences to discuss these topics and sync on these things, and you can literally plug and play a different BISO to do that. Like that's how I'm thinking about the role now in terms of building the program, as opposed to just getting a bunch of smarty pantses that have domain expertise on the business unit they're supporting, right? I'm sure there's other foundational pillars for a program, but I don't want to just rant. So I don't know. I'll ask you or Elizabeth.
Elizabeth, I'll turn it over to you. At MassMutual, what does that look like? What does the BISO program actually kind of, roll up to look like?
No, I absolutely love that response, Chad. And I think that's really important perspective because a lot of times it's tough in the BISO role because you do want to satisfy the business and answer their requests. But also that can mean that you're doing a lot of work that maybe the BISO shouldn't do, right? And I find that a lot of times, like I'll find myself doing some work that is necessary, right? You have to wear a lot of hats and you have to move the business forward. So sometimes I'm doing, administrative work that I'm like, should I really be doing this? But I think it is the responsibility of the BISO to look at that work and help them get through to the next phase, but say, hey, how can we move this work into a repeatable process and simplify, the complexities here moving forward. So it's about working with, the broader cybersecurity organization to make sure that we're identifying where there are inefficiencies in our processes and overall kind of changing the organizational culture. It's about looking at, hey, we're processing a lot of like low and nominal risks that come in and we're spending a lot of time talking about them. Why, and how can we make this better? So I think that's a big role of the BISO that doesn't always get talked about. It's not just about, answering all of the questions and responding to the business's needs. It's about overall making the organization better and developing long-term repeatable processes. So I think that's very interesting, Chad, that you brought that up.
To double click on the organizational maturity thing too, that's another super critical component to consider when building a BISO program. Like, different companies are at different places in their journey, right? And they have different needs, different risks, whatever. And I feel like you definitely can't go in and just say the ideal BISO team will be structured in this way. You really have to take a pulse on, is the business even ready for like various service offerings that a BISO team could fulfill? And if they're not, don't force it, right? Like so for example, like if one service offering is like, let's say threat modeling for all new applications, but your developer or community is still working on avoiding, hard coding credentials or like kind of these foundational issues, like maybe you take some of those service offerings and say, all right, that's for 2023, 2024, right? Like, let's get the basics down first and then staff accordingly and distribute resources accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, that's ultimately how I see it as well. There is a lot that goes into consistency. And I think creating consistency, no matter what type of program you're building, is like the core foundation. So overall, making sure that whatever you've done for one group can be repeated by the next group and so on and so forth. So you're getting the right talent in the right position and making sure that you're continuing to evolve the program at the same time. So evolution of a program really comes down to developing your talent. So at each of your companies, is there any component here that's more about like, how do you keep developing a BISO once you're in role? How do you keep developing those skill sets and that understanding that helps make you improve as well as the BISO program improve for your company?
Yeah, I can jump in here first. So I mean, at MassMutual, we do have a very strong emphasis on employee development plans and making sure that the folks do have them updated and are managing towards them. I think specifically for the BISO role, it's also important to leverage all of the different internal cybersecurity programs, right? And to make sure that you have a strong understanding of the work that's being done in their space. And again, not just from a, again, we have to stay on top of all of the latest technologies. We have to know what's out there so that when businesses are coming to us with problems, we know what are the potential options on the table, right? What's coming down the pipeline soon? How can we help connect them to the right resources? And then that also helps those internal cybersecurity teams to make sure that they are looking into solutions that are right for the business, right? We don't want to go down the path of procuring a solution, as Chad mentioned, if the business isn't ready for that type of solution. So for us to bring back that education of what the business looks at, and again, if we're seeing like, hey, we have all these great policies in place, but if we're seeing, 70% of our business can't actually conform to these policies, that's where we need to like dive in and invest our resources into creating solutions. So it's about really having that strong connection with all of the different programs across domains within your security organization to make sure that you have a strong understanding of what they're doing.
Absolutely. And Chad, for you?
Let me make sure I'm answering the right question. So this is fundamentally like, how do we like up level BISOs or make sure that they're relevant or train or whatever? Yeah,
Yes.
I got a lot of thoughts on this topic. Some of them aren't as productive as you're going to want them to be. I think a BISO, at the end of the day, they need to be able to basically have a one-on-one conversation with a technology executive without a babysitter, right? So communication is absolutely non-negotiable in terms of. So I would say, any skills that go with either presentation or there's stuff on the like LinkedIn Learning or whatever in our various organizations where you can literally learn how to use tact in a business context, right? That's something that's valuable for somebody like me because I like to curse and stuff, right? So I think the communication stuff is super important. When I talk about non-productive opinions, throughout my entire security career, at every organization I've ever worked for, there's always this emphasis from leaders like, you got to stay up to date. You got to get all these certs. You got to get all this training. And then you look at them and you're like, you've been very successful in this industry and you don't have any certs and you don't go to any training. So stop telling me this, right? So I would, with the BISO role, really, I would say it's kind of the same thing. Like you stay current by doing the work, by understanding what we're trying to achieve from a business perspective. And then you understand the technology, like the use cases, as opposed to the bits and bytes. And that's sort of how you maybe stay current. So yeah, those would be two things to consider for me up-leveling BISOs. Again, sorry, I'm more combative than necessary on that topic. I'm just very excited about it.
That's all right. Passion is good, Chad. Passion is good. This is what I'm really passionate about as well. This is definitely something that after giving a ton of thought to, it's more about, I think, again, it's about consistency. So it's developing the skill sets you want your BISOs to possess, not necessarily just throw in a bunch of technology and a bunch of different processes and a bunch of different jargon at them, but more importantly, being very, very specific about what you want them to have as skills, and then being able to help them level up those skills to be able to continue to be successful. So I completely agree with you both from this perspective on a program has to have an element that allows itself to be continuously growing and changing as well as being a BISO. So that's an interesting segue, because what I really want to focus on now is I want to talk about measuring success. It's so hard, right? It's just one of the most challenging ways, I think, that we as a BISO program have to think through. What are we giving back? We know what we're giving back, right? We know the successes we're adding value for, but how do we communicate those successes? How do we share with our leadership teams that we are necessary? We're like a necessity of the company. we're not just a nice to have. We're a necessity line of business, and without us, there would be catastrophic end results. So how do you go about that? I mean, like in your organizations, how do you communicate the success of BISO? How do you share with your leaders that this is a good program and it's working well, and here's what we're measuring to do so? What are those measurements?
I can give a few examples. I'm going to start with just like an individual like measure of success that sometimes is overlooked, and then I can talk more about the programmatic ones. On the individual case, earlier I gave that example of, documenting when you had that 15-minute conversation, right? So sometimes as worker bees, we think, oh, literally all I did was hop on a call and tell them something that was totally obvious. What's the big deal? What's the value proposition there? Well, the value proposition is you told them to engage in enterprise service that's going to kick off all this work, save them all this time, spin up all these different parties that are going to drive towards this outcome that has like meaningful like business value, right? If you didn't have that conversation, that team might be spinning their wheels. They might be trying to roll their own. They might be wasting time. So for the individual, it's like, stop discounting the value of your work just because it took you 5 seconds and it was about as easy as tying your shoes, right? It's not about how much sweat, right? It's about what is the value proposition of what just happened. And don't just think about that call, think about all the externalities that happen after that call. In terms of like programmatically, like, so yeah, metrics are super hard for BISO, KPIs are super hard. So like the tack I've taken honestly is there's a bunch of information security teams that have concrete KPIs, like how long, what's the SLA on making a firewall request, or what's the dwell time for incident response, or like a lot of them do report these kind of tangible things. So what a BISO org can do is literally say, hey, IAM, hey, GRC, hey, SecOps, whoever, I now am a part owner of your KPIs. How do I help you get the high score? Full stop, right? And then, and then you can start talking about actions that your team took to help them reduce or increase the KPI accordingly. Last item I'll say, again, if you go back to like agile workflows and Jira tickets and all that, like you can generate metrics, and some of the metrics may be valuable. Like, is it valuable that, somebody made a request and it took me 1 business day or less to get back to them? I think it is, right? I think those things are important, but it really depends on what story you're trying to tell. So those are some ideas.
Absolutely. Elizabeth, how about for you from your perspective?
Yeah, so from a hard KPI perspective, 100% agree. We're doing the same thing is utilizing program KPIs and to demonstrate, how we're moving the needle. I'm sure many organizations struggle with this, is how to make sure we get that organizational breakdown for all of our different programs. So I'm sure that's not a unique problem for us. So from a hard KPI perspective, there's that. And then, one other thing I'll say too, and this is maybe a little counterintuitive, but I think it depends on where you are from a program maturity perspective, but I think one thing that really does illustrate the success of a BISO program is when you look at a line of business and you see a growing list of cybersecurity risks and problem statements. That means that you're doing a good job. You're identifying them, right? Where a lot of times we're coming into a line of business and we may say, like, the business may say, oh, I think we're good from a cybersecurity perspective, right? We've been doing all the right things. And then as you start having conversations, you're peeling back that onion, right? You're identifying these risks that have existed in their processes for forever and ever. So seeing that growing list is not a bad thing. Certainly over time, as your program matures, you're going to want to make sure that you're making progress against those risks that you've identified. But having that growing list is something that's showing that, hey, we're identifying the unknowns in this space. So I think that's something you can also use to illustrate the work that you're able to achieve.
Yeah, that's a really good point along the maturity curve, I think, because as companies, or as you think about starting off as a BISO, you're kind of going to be looking at your measurement statistics a little differently than as you're looking at a more mature program. that would be able to have a lot more influence, I think, on even writing those KPIs, not just being able to help deliver them, but being a part of the generation of them. So I think as a program evolves and works its way through its own maturity in the company, I think it really gets more of a say. And I think that's what we all come back to, is how much influence do we actually have that we're able to measure? And Chad, you spoke a lot about like, hey, if I didn't have that 5-minute conversation with that person, we would be in a whole different space right now. And we would be wasting company dollars in many different ways, or even creating situations where if they roll their own, whoa, they just increased our risk score significantly. And we really have to think through a lot of that. So as we look forward, as the evolution of BISO continues in your own companies, kind of where do you see BISO evolving? Do you see it continuing to grow? Or is it something that you see is kind of going to level off at some points in time, or even be stagnant?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I've only seen the BISO program firsthand experience from MassMutual. So the other companies I've worked for did not have a BISO program. So I don't have much of a comparison, but I do know that many different organizations have maybe a larger BISO program than we have at MassMutual. And a BISO will have, maybe a team of direct reports, or there will be kind of a centralized team that will help with some of the administrative KPIs, metrics, working through some of that work. So I can see, our team in particular kind of long-term of evolving into something like that, because we certainly have a need to meet a lot of those administrative requirements that bog us down and maybe prevent us from having some of those strategic leadership conversations that we really need to be having more of. So I can see the program growing and evolving in that way. But again, I think this field is new, right? As you mentioned, Ranae, that we're going to see, I think, a lot of the best aspects of different companies' BISO programs start to surface. And I think we'll all adopt a little bit of those practices.
Absolutely. Yeah. How about you, Chad?
Yeah, it's hard to say. There are things that can indicate which direction a team needs to go. Usually those like strategic planning, next fiscal year security budget conversations, those usually call out not only, security investments in people and tools or whatever, but also partnerships that InfoSec is going to have with the various stakeholders that are either dependencies on rolling out these capabilities or their consumers, right? So that can usually point to where does this team need to flex up or down, left or right, whatever, to match our strategic needs as the program goes. There's this tension between anybody that's in a consulting-like role should always be trying to work themselves out of a job. But the thing is, as IT in business threat landscape, as things change, the business is changing and security is changing. So yes, you may have worked yourself out of the job that existed 2 years ago, right? And now you're working on working yourself out of this job, and so on and so forth. So there's always that tension. And then like the right size, ultimately it's what capabilities do you want your BISO to deliver? Do you envision the BISO delivering something that is more operational, like application security requirements or risk assessments, like these kind of operational things? And in that case, you have to have that conversation of, do I want my BISO doing this, or does it make more sense for GRC or AppSec to do this, right? Since the BISO role is really that gap filler, it does necessarily butt up against those other functions. And the conversation should never be, let's make BISO do it versus not let them do it. It should be like, if there is tension, if we have this team that is filling this gap, that means there may be a capability that we need to increase, right? So I think just leaders should pay attention to that when they see bleed over. It's like, you don't think about it like, oh, I need more BISOs because we're doing all this crap. What you need to say is, why can't that team do the thing? And that, I don't mean that in a bad or accusatory way. Is that other team getting the resources they need? Are they plugged in at the right time? Like BISO should be asking those questions as they start this scope creep.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I think one of the things that I think is critical to evolution of any BISO program is, I think overall you got to get people who are willing to reinvent themselves. Because I don't know how many times I've reinvented my own job. I mean, it's the same title, but I do it differently and I approach it differently based off the area that I'm working with or things of that nature that I have to be flexible with. But in addition to that, I think it's all about the marketing. I think it's really important to not just be able to measure the success of BISO, but to market the success of BISO, because we are not required in any conversation. There's nowhere in any policy that says you have to have a BISO sitting at the table with you when you're making big decisions. But if we do our job right and we do our job well, then we are invited into those conversations because we are added value. Like you had said, Elizabeth, we show that value proposition right away. And that brings us into more dialogue and therefore allows us to see a lot more of the organization that we wouldn't normally see. So I feel like overall, as this continues to evolve, I think the really big important part is companies have to not just back the fact that they have a BISO program, but be willing to just shout it from the rooftops, and I think that's exciting about what Cyversity's done here is being able to talk about the BISO role. And this whole evolution really ties into like, okay, so maybe we got some people on the call today excited about wanting to be a BISO. I know I love this job. This is probably my favorite role I've ever played. And I'm not just saying that because we're talking about BISO right now. So honestly, but what I really want to hear from both of you here as we kind of wrap up this conversation today, I'd love to get your perspective. And Chad, I want to start with you. What are some of the facets? What are some of the things that people would possess or might be interested in learning more about to be prepared to become a BISO?
Honestly, I think, well, to become a BISO, I think like this is not an entry level gig. Sorry, like that, and that's not to say that you can't have. It's totally okay to have like significant weaknesses in your experience set or your knowledge set. That's normal, right? But this is like if you don't understand how an enterprise makes decisions, you got to learn that before you can be an effective BISO. Full stop. That's like the number one requirement. It doesn't matter how smart you are, how good you are at sniffing out risk. Doesn't matter how technical you are. Like if you don't know how your organization goes from an idea that's a twinkle in someone's eye to actually like execution at scale, you're not going to be able to succeed in role at all. So you just gotta. I'm not saying you got to go out and get an MBA, but in your current role, start talking to business leaders and start taking a long view of like, why did they make that decision? Maybe I'll ask them why they made that decision. What are the business drivers for that decision? You got to get good there before you're going to ever even touch this role.
Absolutely, yes. Okay, Elizabeth, I'm going to ask you the same question. I'd love to get your thoughts. Like, what were some of the things that helped you prepare to be a BISO? And then what are some of the things that you mentor? So as you mentor new BISOs, what are some of those things you look for in those candidates that are considered for BISO?
Yeah, absolutely. And totally agree with everything Chad said. I think the biggest piece of advice I'd give anyone is to get comfortable being uncomfortable, right? And be curious, ask questions. I think one of the hardest parts about being a BISO is, again, the amount of, the hat you'll have to wear one day. You never know what that's going to look like and what your day is going to look like, what domain you're going to have to jump into, what business leaders you might have to talk to. And that is a lot. So start getting yourself comfortable with asking questions and diving deeper. If you don't fully understand, as Chad was mentioning, why someone did something or why something happened the way it did, start asking those questions, because sometimes they may have the same questions, right? And they just wanted to move on and not talk about it, right? So I think that, having that courage is super important. And then also, as Chad mentioned, if you do feel that, hey, there's like a certain domain that I'm really uncomfortable with, within cybersecurity or within business, like take the opportunity in your current role to try to get experience and dive in a little bit deeper. And it doesn't mean, if you don't feel great about, identity and access management, you don't have to spend, 5 years in that domain. but it could be a good opportunity to see like, hey, are there any shadowing experiences out there right now that I could, help with this operational procedure or help with this project launch, to just get myself a little more comfortable with the terminology that's used and the processes that exist in this space. So I think that's a good way to kind of help, again, it's generalized knowledge, right? You don't have to be an expert in everything. And I definitely don't want to discourage folks who don't feel like, "Oh, I don't know everything about everything." You don't have to, and you shouldn't. So just make sure that you have a generalized comfort with talking about some of the terms that you're going to see across all domains, and dive in where you feel like you don't. So again, communication and presentation skills. And that's something that the best way to practice those is to actually practice them, right? And to constantly put yourself in situations where you're feeling uncomfortable, you're presenting to large executive audiences. If you don't have the opportunity right now in your current role, talk to your leadership team, see if there are opportunities for you to get in front of groups that make you uncomfortable and to get you practicing your communication skills. And of course, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm sure Chad, you and Ranae, you'd extend the same too. Like we'd be happy to talk to anyone who's interested in learning more about the BISO role and what our career journeys looked like. So make sure you're talking to other folks who are currently in the role too, to see, what their journey looked like and what helped them the most.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's well said, Elizabeth. And absolutely, yes, I know we all speak to the fact that we would all be happy to have that conversation with anybody interested. And the reality, I think, overall is, I love how you said it. It's get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Say yes to things you would never even consider in your normal job. In fact, the further away from what you're comfortable with, the better. It'll get you really used to being in different circumstances and situations, which you will encounter as a BISO. You don't get to choose the projects you get involved in. They choose you, and you just have to just roll up your sleeves and get involved. And as a generalist, I think that really helps you, because if you're too specific in your knowledge, you feel like you kind of run the conversation. Let me be clear. We are not actually running the conversation as a BISO. We're actually moderating the conversation like I'm doing today. So you're getting parties to talk to one another, and you're thinking about that relationship building. So it's a skill set that if you really enjoy working with people and bringing people together, it is a must-have for being a BISO. It is very critical on the soft skills spectrum. Just as Elizabeth said, presenting and being able to even share your ideas. I know it's strange sometimes, but confidence is a big deal for us. We have to be able to walk in and know we're bringing value forward and be able to speak that truth. So thank you both so much for today's discussion. I really appreciate you both sharing your experience with us. And Cyversity, thank you for this incredible opportunity of being able to present to our audience today, and for all the great work you're doing in our community. There is a survey that will follow this session. So please feel free to submit your survey with any feedback you have on today's session or anything you want Cyversity to know from you. In addition, I'd like to take this time, if anyone had submitted any questions, to go forward and see if we can answer some of those questions before we conclude today's session. So let me check the Q&A quick and see what we got. I have no questions in Q&A. Really, no one has any questions? We did that good of a job?
Yes, we did.
Anyone to raise your hand? Anybody have any questions now? Terrific. Tracy Grayson asked, what's your biggest job challenge as a BISO/PISO? Good one.
Yeah, so I think for me, and I think so my fellow BISOs, this probably also resonates with them, the BISO role can very easily become a dumping ground, right? Again, we're playing that moderator role between the business and cybersecurity, and sometimes the problems from both can just all end up in your lap, right? So I think that for me has been one of the biggest challenges, and it's really about making sure that as a BISO, you can create healthy boundaries for yourself. And then to, again, identify when you have work on your plate that maybe isn't best served by a BISO, right? And to help develop those efficient processes for the organization, looking at some of the low and nominal stuff that's coming across your desk, deprioritizing. So I think that is very tricky, right? To constantly be getting new stuff placed on your desk and figuring out how to prioritize appropriately. And I think that's been one of my biggest challenges.
I literally got heartburn when you said the thing about dumping ground. And I think I would agree, it's one of the major pain points, and it's changed how when new work shows up, it's always a spirit of, yes, we can absolutely help you in the short term. If you tell me what your medium term plan is, then we can talk, right? Then the other challenge I would say is like literally getting invited and being looped into the right things and knowing what's going on. There's a lot of folks, well-meaning folks that even love security that think, oh, this meeting or this QBR or this announcement has no security nexus, therefore I'm not going to invite any security people. And it's like, no, please invite me regardless. Let me make that decision. You know, I know you're trying to help me out. So that would be a thing. It's just getting involved in the right things at the right time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with both of you. Definitely the dumping ground. Yeah, that's happened. But in addition, I think for me, it's always keeping your priorities straight, because like I keep a list of 4 priorities, and every day that changes. So sometimes my leaders tell me that changes. Sometimes, you know, it's the business side that tells me that changes. Sometimes it's a threat change that has happened in the landscape that changes it. So it's staying on top of understanding what you can deliver, and don't overpromise, because that's the other thing we have to be super careful of. Our say-do ratios are critical. If we say we're going to do something, we have to execute that thing and prove it, because then we're going to get invited again. But if we don't, for some reason, then hey, there goes our invite. Our invite falls off the table pretty quickly. So I think that's also something that can be a pretty significant challenge in the role. Thank you, Tracy, for your question. All right, looks like we got another question that we can get to. We got 4 more minutes left. Oh, and thank you, Tracy. Tracy says, great responses. Thank you. Any other questions or anything else anyone wants to hear more from our panelists on? All right, I take silence and no questions in the box as a response. So thank you very much again for all your time today. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you again, Cyversity.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
all.